Prologue. The forest was silent. Nothing stirred. Then suddenly a cat seemed to come from nowhere. He appeared on the branch of a tree and seemed to glide down. He curled his tail around his paws as he sat on the hard forest floor. Then another cat appeared. She crawled out of a nearby pool as if it were a lake. When she crawled out, she didn't shake the water off. In fact, she was transparent and was outlined with blue. A glow shimmered off her pelt like the sunlight on the ripples of the pond. The tom was also transparent, but he glowed with a greenish tinge. They were joined by two other cats. One was a she-cat whose pelt shimmered orange. Warmth spread all around her. The final cat came with a gust of wind. Some trailing dust was picked up by the gale, dancing in the wind, and then formed a swirling image of a cat. They were all silent. Then the first cat spoke. His voice creaked with the sounds of branches.
So, it is agreed?
Again, all were silent. Then the blue cat spoke.
You must act quickly. The clans must return. The water spirits agree. The wind spirits agree,
said the swirling image.
as do the fire spirits.
The cat of warmth stood. The tree cat closed his eyes.
I presume you have all chosen suitable leaders?
The other three dipped their heads. The tree cat kept his eyes closed.
Good, but who will go to them?
No cat stepped forward. Then the water spirit spoke.
I will not go. The living is nothing like us. Just looking at them makes me sick. They're so, which is why I will not go either,
spoke the wind spirit.
It causes me much grief for our lost brethren. Then I'll go.
All the cats turned their head. The fire spirit spoke again.
I'll go to them.
The tree spirit narrowed his eyes.
All right then, if you're sure.
The black and white Tom's breathing was shallow. Death scent wreathed around him. His kin crowded around him. The brown and gray she-cat buried her face in his fur.
Father, oh father, don't go!
Fernley's eyes were bleared. His eyes widened. He was seeing things the healthy cats were blind to. He drew a shuddering breath.
Misty Pill will be your leader someday.
His head rolled back and his spirit left him. His daughter threw back her head and screamed. Meanwhile, two cats stood in the shadows. The bigger of the two dug his claws in the ground and snarled with frustration. In a nearby den, a gray and white queen was in shock as her kin gathered around her.
We did it!
Yes!
Start.
Chapter 1. Misty Pelt was shaken with shock and grief. Too much was going on for her to comprehend. Her kin started to disperse from the elder's dead body and came toward her like a mob. She whispered shakily to them.
No.
Her eyes went wide and she drew her kit closer with her tail. Her kit whimpered, scared, into her fur.
But you must. Fernley is wise enough to know who should lead us.
All of her kin were crunching her and her kit into a tighter and tighter circle, murmuring persuasions. They seemed mindless, how they spoke with no emotions, and bleak. It made Misty Pelt's fur stand on end. They sounded dead, as if controlled by some unknown force.
Please!
They begged in unison.
Lead us!
Misty Pelt couldn't take it any longer. Her kin were now pressed against her body. Whispers turned to threatening shouts.
Lead us! How do you dare disobey your great father's death wish?
Misty Pelt was compelled to just run, but there was nowhere to run to. They had completely surrounded her as they whispered in unison against her ear. Swift Hawk pushed through the crowd, shoving cats and waking them up from their possessed actions. They shuffled away from Swift Hawk, giving her Misty Pelt's full attention.
Why can't you lead us?
Swift Hawk added softly, and her confused murmurs of her kin. Misty Pelt's gaze met with her mother's as she replied slowly.
I don't really know, Mother. I just can't.
Misty Pelt let her head fall in absolute defeat. She muttered something under her breath that no one else could hear. Swift Hawk patted to her and licked the top of her head. She whispered comfortingly.
How about you try and be leader for a little while? If you don't like it, we can elect a new leader.
Swift Hawk gave her an honest gaze that made Misty Pelt's fur lay back down smoothly along her back. Starcat looked up at her mother with an innocent look on her face. The other cats started murmuring agreement with Swift Hawk's proclamation. They all eventually nodded in approval. Misty Pelt felt relieved that her kin weren't forcing this duty upon her. She said without thinking about it first.
Thank you for giving me a chance.
Her kin nodded just once slightly and went back to the dead elder's body. The realization that their leader had given them so so well for so long, was gone and could not come back, made them feel all desperate. The emotions of the group hung heavily in the air like a fast-approaching thunderstorm. Misty Pelt's gaze fell on the dead body, but did not dare approach. She felt like her feet were glued to the ground she was sitting on, and did not dare move. She felt like her kit left her mother and looked at the body for a moment. In that moment, Starkit's eyes glimmered with such wisdom that it almost looked like as if she had the power of the spirits in her paws. Starkit turned her gaze toward her mother, and that wisdom continued to emanate from her ice-blue eyes. Misty Pelt was sure she saw something move in those piercing blue pools of light. It almost looked like a hawk swooping down at a small white form, carrying away, and the gray form with legs followed. It happened so quickly, Misty Pelt couldn't tell what had just happened. She also didn't realize that something with an orange tint was standing directly behind her kit. Phoenix Feather had seen the whole scene, and now extremely suspicious that some evil power had controlled Misty Pelt's kin. She was now also afraid of what might be lurking in the dark, even when she was the source of all the light in the world. The warmth she spread was supposed to wipe away fear, but yet it hadn't swept her own fears. She looked at the family from behind a large birch tree. She could only think of a way to get Misty Pelt to leave her home. She sighed and unveiled herself from the birch tree, only to be seen and felt by Starkit and Misty Pelt. Misty felt something odd. It was a strange warmth, like that of the sun of a sunny day, but it was the middle of the night. She looked in the direction she felt it from. There it was. The pale, orange outline of a cat stood against the darkness. It almost sending a message that you need to leave. You can... Oops.
It's okay.
You cannot stay here. Then it disappeared, fading into the darkness. That screwed up. Chapter 2. Misty Pelt lay curled in her nest, lost in thought. She was contemplating her new role as a leader and the message from the ghost cat. She had told her that she couldn't stay as a leader. But why? It was the tradition of the family group that the leader of her family group that the dying leader would choose the next. Starkit snuggled deeper into her belly, and she curled tighter around her. Barkstream was Starkit's father and Misty Pelt's mate, but they hated each other. Ever since she was young, Misty Pelt had dreamed of living on her own, so her parents had betrothed her in an attempt to make her stay. But it only made her angrier and more determined to leave. Misty Pelt couldn't help but wanting to leave the family group and wanting to have friends. The idea of living her entire life by herself, a cold den at night, nobody to talk to, she realized that the whole reason she wanted to get away from her family was because of her father and mate. Hornet, her father, had always had an air of suspicion around him. Misty Star hated him. He had always said she would never amount to anything. And the look on his face when Fernleaf had said that Misty Pelt would be a leader. No, he said that Misty Pelt would be a leader someday. The Queen sat up straight. Does this mean that she was not the true leader? Perhaps she could leave. Tear gripped her as she remembered the ghost cat that came and told her to leave. She had been trying hard not to think about it, but it was impossible. She said that Misty Pelt could not stay. Was this why? She was not the true leader? A cold chill swept over her. Misty Pelt realized it was because her mate wasn't in the den. Where was Barkstream? Then she heard a soft meow from the outside of her den. Her ears pricked as she heard her mate and father whisper to each other.
You were so sure it would work! It did work. It's just that we weren't expecting him to choose her. So what do we do now?
Asked Barkstream, a hint of hopelessness in his voice.
We kill Misty Pelt. She's asleep in her den. She won't expect it. As soon as she's dead, we can bury her body and say to the others that she went out hunting and put us in charge until she came back. And when she never shows up, we'll say we suppose a fox got her while she was out hunting, and you'll be in charge like we should be.
There was silence.
What about Starkit? She's almost old enough to eat fresh kale. She'll be fine.
Misty Pelt was shocked that Barkstream loved Starkit. She supposed it was natural if she died he would be concerned about his daughter would eat. But then her shock turned to fear. They were plotting to kill her.
When do you want to do it? I told you, she's asleep in her nest. There's no better time than now. All right, I'm right behind you. Barkstream, you hold her down and cover her muzzle while I do it. I don't want her screaming and alerting the others.
Misty Pelt heard paws approaching. There was no doubt. This was the reason why the ghost cat had told her to run. She snatched up Starkit, who mewed with protest, and began swerving her head around wildly. She had to find a way out. She had to. But there was no way out, except for the entrance, where Barkskin and Hornet would come in. Then it was too late. The two Toms entered the den and stopped suddenly, shocked that their victim was awake and had supposedly heard their plan to kill her. Misty Pelt crouched in fear and let out a muffled yell of terror around her daughter's fur. Then she spotted a space in between the cats. Taking their shock as an advantage, Misty Pelt squeezed past them and ran blindly into the forest. She jumped over the circle of rocks that made a homestead of the family group with the strength of fear. The trees were smears as she ran full speed. She ignored every bramble that snagged her pelt, or the rocks that she tripped over, and her daughter's squeals as she bumped around. Misty Pelt heard the thunder of paws and ran faster. Were her assassins pursuing her? She scrambled underneath the two-legged briar that marked the end of the woods and raced across the meadow, ignoring the stalks of prairie grass that would whip back and hit her in the face. She ran past the two-legged homestead at the end of the meadow and fell. She was running so fast she had not seen the slope downward. She crashed down and rolled into a ball to protect her daughter. Starkit's scream rang in her ears. She tumbled down the hill, her eyes closed. Was that running she could hear? Suddenly a pain erupted in the back of her head. Misty Pelt crumpled. The pain burned at her brain, consuming all thought. Her brain went numb, and the world fell silent. Misty Pelt slowly became aware that her legs and belly fur were wet and cold. She felt solid ground underneath her. She could hear a rushing sound. She could also hear the ringing of her ears. Misty Pelt's head was pounding and she moaned. Her head felt deflated and her pelt was stinging. Misty Pelt's legs ached. She opened her eyes. Everything was swimming. The world began to spin and Misty Pelt closed her eyes. Slowly Alta came back to Misty Pelt. Starkit! Misty Pelt sprang to her paws. She swayed for a few moments and steadied herself. She could see a rock that she had slapped her head against. She must have passed out. The world was slightly blurry. Misty Pelt felt like she could hear something. She could use sleep for a moon. Starkit squealed. Misty Pelt looked up to see her daughter. She tried to run, but her legs hurt too much. She waddled over to her daughter. Starkit began trotting away. Misty Pelt followed on unsteady paws. Starkit stopped in the front of an entrance to a hole in the ground. Her mother smiled down at her. Starkit blinked. Misty Pelt guessed that Starkit must have found it while she was unconscious. Together they climbed in. Misty Pelt curled up on the floor in the den. Starkit nuzzled deeper into her mother's fur. Misty Pelt let a wave of sleep engulf her as she fell into a dreamless sleep.